Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Hermankova from Aarhus University, and I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me to such a wonderful and exciting event. And please accept my apologies that I can't be there with you in person or even virtually. Today, I will share with you my experience with using data from the Epigraphic Database Heidelberg for my own quantitative research on inscriptions. I would like to note that I am in no way affiliated with EDH, and I am only offering a user perspective on dealing with such a complex dataset. You can access the presentation via the link bit.ly EDH_Uppsala. So, first, let me tell you a bit about myself. I'm a postdoc at Aarhus University in the social dynamics in the Ancient Mediterranean project, and at the same time at Mainz University at the FAIR Epigraphy project. I hate disciplinary labels, but if I must, I would call myself a researcher of Ancient Mediterranean with a keen interest in digital epigraphy. The primary focus of my research, inscriptions, are short texts written on a durable material that survived in large quantities until modern days. However, we are unable precisely specify how many of them survived, as there is no single source of truth, a master database, if you will. Nor we are able to say how many inscriptions existed in antiquity, and the debates on their survival rate are based on very limited samples such as single city context, etc. However, inscriptions represent a great source of information about people of different backgrounds and ethnicities all around the Mediterranean. Thus, inscriptions are a more democratic source than, let's say, literary evidence. But in order to afford an inscription, people had to be relatively well off and see some sort of benefit in doing so. The body of inscriptions is not monolithic, but there is a great variation of societal functions. The first large group of texts was created by public authorities in order to regulate and manage society. The main goal was to preserve and disseminate information that would maintain social cohesion and keep the communities in order, but it was not meant so much for record keeping as in an economic sense, unlike in other cultures. The other group contains text published on behalf of individuals or private social groups, and their main goal was to preserve the information and to bring societal and economic benefit to the interested parties. Today, I'm going to be talking about Epigraphic Database Heidelberg, containing over 81,000 mostly Latin inscriptions. Until 2021, EDH was the best curated large-scale digital dataset for the study of Latin epigraphy and formed the standard for the entire discipline. The data is available under a CC license in several formats, as you can see. For the purpose of quantitative study of epigraphic trends, we have created a snapshot of the dataset in September 2020, which I will be discussing today. You can read more about it in our recent article that I've linked below. Now, I would like to take you through the dataset, introducing the main categories of the TextWorlds project and how they translate to the categories used in EDH. EDH distinguishes between 34 categories of material that were mapped onto the TextWorlds categories. As you can see, the majority of records have an unknown material, That's due to the fact that the inscription might have been lost or the original information was simply not recorded when the inscription was first published 200 years ago. Stone is not surprisingly the second most numerous category, followed by clay and metal. Perishable material is recorded only rarely. Artifact type. EDH lists 39 categories of artifact type, with the most common category being artifact in the TextWorlds classification system. And for example, tabula, altar, stele, instrumentum domesticum, statue base, etc. in the EDH classification system. The individual categories are not strictly defined and sometimes are a matter of preference of individual epigraphers. So for example, the difference between tabula and stele is really sometimes not non-existent. Genre. As to the genre, according to the TextWorlds categorization, the largest category is votive, which in fact encompasses votive and funerary inscriptions according to the EDH classification. The monumental category contains all sorts of inscriptions written on a public monument, including milestone or, for example, seed inscription. That said, I have spent last year trying to consolidate the most basic types of inscriptions with several projects, and the task seems almost Herculean, as there are many different approaches and competing classifications across the discipline. I will talk about it later on. The next one is language. Language is relatively straightforward, as over 97% of inscriptions were written in Latin, with some texts being in Greek or a combination of Latin and other Mediterranean languages. Script. Script as such was not defined in the dataset, as it was assumed Latin script is the predominant one. Thus, we can assume inscriptions in Latin are also written in a Latin script, and inscriptions in Greek are written in the alphabet. Spatial data. Geographical coordinates are available for 97% of inscriptions, but their precision varies from the exact location to only very approximate, or to a region or province in some cases. This is caused by the fact that inscriptions might have moved in the past or were reused in a secondary building, or simply the original editor did not record their find spot in a detailed way. Excuse me. Right. This map shows a spatial distribution of all inscriptions from EDH, giving you an idea of the vast spatial extent of the dataset. Some areas are not represented well in EDH, as the inscriptions are recorded by different databases. So for example, France or Italy are fairly underrepresented on the current map. Now to the temporal data. When we look at the temporal dimension of the dataset, 69% of inscriptions contain chronological data. However, some can be dated with high precision to 1 year, others can be only dated with a precision of several centuries. The average length of their dating interval in EDH is 120 years, meaning an inscription was created anywhere within that interval, but because of a lack of characteristic dating traits, epigraphers were not able to assign the date more precisely. We still wanted to be able to visualize all the inscriptions with varying degrees of uncertainty together on a timeline, and thus we needed to come up with an unconventional approach, being inspired by recent applications of Monte Carlo simulations in archaeology. For each inscription, we made 1,000 versions of their dating using one random year from within its dating interval, and then we combined them into 1,000 simulations of the entire dataset. Here you can see a visualization of 10 provinces with the most inscriptions and their development and the development of the overall number of inscriptions over time. The thickness of the line signifies the level of uncertainty. The narrower the line is, the less temporal uncertainty there is, and the light gray color around each line represents the 95% confidence interval. What is interesting is the different onset of the growing epigraphic production in each province, reflecting not only the socio-political development in a given province, of course, but also the uneven state of discovery and preservation in different places of the Roman Empire. We applied the same method for different types of inscriptions, seeing the funerary inscriptions in blue here, together with the votive inscriptions in orange. They together represent a bulk of surviving epigraphic production. And we can see they both became particularly popular means of expression in the late 2nd century AD. What I would like to bring our attention to now is the participation bias. Most of the inscriptions in EDH contain structured information about individuals on those inscriptions, enabling us to look at the demographic patterns and assess whether they provide a true reflection of demographic patterns or highly skewed images. I will be looking at funerary inscriptions as a death, in a sense, is very democratic. And it should provide us with a snapshot of demographic patterns, or maybe not. If we, however, look at the gender ratio, we see that the Roman society was either highly male-dominated, or simply the inscriptions were mostly made by males for other males. What is true? A similar problem comes with statements of age on funerary texts. 14% of people were provided with age statement when they deceased, again being highly variable from single hours to 200 years. Plus, the phenomenon of rounding to 5 or 10 years is well known, as well as vague statements of age. When we look at the mean age on inscriptions, 32.75 years, it roughly corresponds with the life expectancy during the Roman Empire. However, when we look at the demographic groups on the right-hand chart, we see overinflation in the oldest groups and underrepresentation in the youngest groups at the bottom, and highly biased female population, and again predominance of male population in all age groups. Lastly, looking at the status on funerary inscriptions without any other context could lead to an assumption that majority of inhabitants of the Roman Empire were soldiers and not, for example, agriculture producers. That's because the status attribute in EDH only records certain groups of the population in terms of socioeconomic prestige, while neglecting the others. I've already hinted at some of the challenges throughout the talk, and I'm sure they are not only specific to epigraphy. missing and uncertain data, the inexistence of a single source of truth, and preservation and participation biases are just the tip of the iceberg. On the top of that, one has to face the unstable landscape of digital resources. EDH officially closed down after 35 years in December 2021, and the internal structure of the source slightly changed. That also means that pipelines and scripts we created in 2020 now have to be rewritten to match the new source, and there is no guarantee they will work in 2023. A potential solution to this problem would be adherence to discipline-wide standards and implementation of linked open data principles. But we are not there yet. The generally accepted standards covering, for example, material, artifact type, or genre do exist in a rudimentary form, duplicates and missing hierarchy, and not really everyone uses them. So we are easily left with a distinct classification system for every single database. I am not sure about the situation in other disciplines, but epigraphy has still a long way to go before it can be truly linked and open. Well, what have we learned? To sum up, what have we learned? We have learned that the Latin epigraphic record in EDH provides a biased image of Roman society. The inscriptions are not reflections of true demographic trends, but they represent a rather specific cultural tendency of individual social groups. The Roman epigraphic record was not as uniform as it may seem, but we have seen the trends differ in time and space. And more importantly, the results we may get can be only as good as the data we put in. In the example of the recent developments with EDH, I have tried to briefly illustrate the importance of the sustainability of datasets and the need to advocate for the broad use of discipline-wide standards. Thank you for listening, and please get in touch with me. Thank you.